Do, 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 do. And he must cast the ring into the fires of Mount Doom.
Honey, what are you doing in that ring?
Uh, I am Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and I'm continuing my reading of The Lord of the Rings. In this video, I'm covering the first 3 chapters in Book 6, as it's labeled in a 1-volume edition like this, which is to say the first 3 chapters of the second half of The Return of the King. There's a raven calling pretty loud. Now, this picks up where we left off in the second book of the Two Towers, and I just made one video of the whole second half of the Two Towers because there wasn't as much to say from an Old Norse or Old English perspective. That's largely true of these first 3 chapters too, although it occurs to me I have a few more maybe cultural remarks to make that came up in thinking about Frodo and Sam. First of all, pretty impressed by the timeline that Tolkien continually keeps. He does want you to know what's happening at the same time with, Aragorn and Gandalf as what's happening with Frodo and Sam. He's good about that, even good about keeping the moon phases consistent. That stuff is really impressive, and I think that he deserves a lot of credit for it. We get a lot of internal monologue from Sam here, and it occurred to me, maybe this is semi-obvious, but they don't pay me for brains, that Sam, as the survivor, spoiler alert, of this part of the story, of course we would have more of his perspective, right? So it makes perfect sense that we get a lot of Sam's perspective and we don't get a lot of Frodo's, except as Frodo talks to Sam. I've still wondered a lot what orcs are. This is, I don't know if this counts as a running joke or what, but I have still been kind of impressed by how vague Tolkien is about what different beings are. Here we hear, for example, that they are, quote, night-eyed, off quote. At the same time, Frodo and Sam hide from them in the dark. So, I don't know, can they see in the day? Obviously they can. Do they see better at night, but like worse somehow? I don't know. I feel like this is a little bit inconsistent. At some point we hear that they have fangs, or at least one of them has fangs. That at least gave me a picture. But I don't think there was ever just a description of orcs. I thought that there was an interesting difference between the orcs who come from Barad-dûr, who have the mark of the red eye, and the ones who come from Minas Morgul, who have a, quote, moon disfigured with a ghastly face of death, off quote, as their sigil. That ghastly face of death, I guess that's something like what I'm used to seeing on pickup trucks. I don't know. I've never liked skulls as imagery. It's a big thing for people now. I guess maybe it has been for a long time, but like I sort of agree with Tolkien. It always looks sort of ghastly to me. Then we get a lot of orc names as the orcs are fighting and arguing and such. And it occurred to me that every single one of them has only back vowels. There's no front vowels. So all the vowels are a, u, o. There's no e, a, u, a. I'm sure that's part of the linguistic effect Tolkien is going for, even if he doesn't have a full Orcish language written out. I also note that the sibilants in their names are z and sh, but not s, unless the s is compounded with something else, like in snaga. So snaga, gorbog, there's a lot of g, a lot of g. Gorbog, logdoof, musgosh, all these names. Somehow the back vowels and the gus and the shus and zuz add up to something that sounds threatening to an English speaker, maybe. not threatening, but just rough or something like that. Like the way that people sometimes think that German sounds kind of rough, which I think depends a lot on the speaker, right? Like any language can sound sort of rough depending on, who's saying what to you. But we have sort of a perception of German that way. But this isn't very like German, right? German, yeah, I guess like it has some of those characteristics, but German has plenty of front vowels. So anyway, also I thought it was funny that one of the orcs mentions, quote, "You two precious captains have made of things. The mess you two precious captains have made of things fighting over the swag," off quote. And I thought, Frodo was swag, like I do, right? He's got like the cool, logo pens and stickers and uh, so swag. Frodo's got a spread shop or whatever. He's on Zazzle. My stuff that sent to Patreon this year around the holidays was made by one of the nicer shops. I don't remember what it was called. It wasn't. It was my fiance who did it. We also see orcs as having claws in this chapter. So there's that. And one thing I remembered this from middle school as soon as I saw it again. Frodo says, quote, "I'll never forget their claws and eyes." There's the evidence they have claws. Sam says, "You won't if you talk about them, Mr. Frodo." Uh, so that sounds to me like, that's stern soldier stuff. Like, yeah, it seems like something from a World War II movie, climate private. And reminds me, of course, of World War II veterans that I knew who were often very reluctant to talk about their experience. We hear about the orc clothes they put on. There's some long, hairy breeches. Of course, hairy breeches in Old Norse is lothbrok. So I don't know if he's thinking about that or not. They are made of, quote, "some unclean beast fell," off quote. So fell, very old word for something like hide or skin. For some reason, I guess this made me think they were made of buffalo or something. Which, by the way, kind of wishing that my good friends in Thermopolis, Wyoming, who make buffalo stuff at Merlin's Hideout, kind of wishing I had some buffalo gloves right now, because even these Finnish ones from Varusteleka, they're just mechanics, but they're pretty good. A little rough in 0-degree temperatures like this. Oh, also, apparently, orcs walk bow-legged, so that's maybe another thing. They have a weird, and they walk like Gary Cooper entering a saloon. Chapter 2 is more of the sort of stern soldier things. Sam says, quote, "If Shagrat himself was to offer me a glass of water, I'd shake his hand," said Sam. "Don't say such things," said Frodo. "It only makes it worse," off quote. Come back with a couple more comments on chapters 2 and 3 of Book 6, The Lord of the Rings. Let me just give you a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost. I was a little surprised that somewhere in Mordor there's a place called Isenmouth, the Iron Jaws of Karach Angren. Like, look, you already had a river Isen. Why is the Isenmouth here? Tolkien is apparently fascinated with this SR distinction. In Old English, you have both Isen and Iren as words for iron. He likes the Isen one, likes to pull it out. I was surprised at something that reminded me of True Detective, the end of season 1. Spoiler alert, kind of. Just something someone says at the end of season 1. Sam watches a star twinkle in Mordor and remembers that the shadow that separates him from the light of the stars is a passing thing. I don't know. It's not an impossible metaphor to come up with on your own, but I wonder if the little monologue at the end of True Detective doesn't owe something to that. Okay, and here's something. Here's a cultural note. There is a ton of hand holding in this book. Men hold each other's hands all the time. Frodo holds Sam's hand. Sam holds Frodo's hand. Merry and Pippin hold each other's hands in Minas Tirith. Men are holding each other's hands all the time. This is culturally extremely alien to me. It was reading this as a kid, and it's still sort of jarring as an adult. I don't know if in mid-century Britain this was more normal or what. I infer that it must have been. which is surprising. It's hard to think of that as a culture that would be that different from mine, right? Late 20th, early 21st century USA, but I wouldn't dream of holding the hand of a friend, right? Like I could never socially recover from it, right? Um, the only hands that I think it's culturally acceptable to hold are small child holding parent's hand. I guess I've held my grandma's hand, to help her over ice. That's fine. Or significant others holding hands. That's it. Um, you know, Aside from my grandma or, or you know, aside from my grandma or fiance, like I can remember stretching out a hand to help a woman, like over some ice or tough rocks or something like that. And the couple of instances in my memory in which I did are still like etched in my memory because of that look that they gave me, like, okay, but this means nothing and you must never speak of this, you bastard. Right? Like, so I guess in my culture is just like it, it's this more significant thing. Uh and maybe I don't know, maybe some of you come from societies where handholding is more normal. To me, it's fraught with difficulties. Um, all right. I marveled that they could see Mount Doom 40 miles away. I don't know, maybe they're just seeing the smoke, but it looks like from the description they're seeing the mountain itself. When we read a little bit further on that it's only, like, of course, look, I live in Colorado, right? So my, you know, standards about mountains are, that's 9,000 feet, right? I'm at like 8,500 feet. Um, but these are like Appalachian high mountains, boo, like 4,500 feet or something. Mount Doom is not very big. How are they seeing that 40 miles away? You can see the Rockies maybe from 40 miles away. I don't know if you can see 4,500 foot peak from 40 miles away. Maybe you can. I'm not used to such girly mountains out here, but just struck me as odd. Unless Mordor is super, super, super flat, right? I mean, but seeing 40 miles away, I don't know. It seems like you would have to be really high to see that far away, or what you're looking at be really high. Just struck me as maybe slightly off, but I could be wrong. That may be something Tolkien knows better than I do. I was struck to read about these orc bloodhounds. Am I hearing those wolves again? There's a wolf rescue near mine. They're not wild wolves, or well, they're rescued wolves. Tolkien uses the word Gyll, Ghyll, which I've never seen in my life. I was impressed by Sam's woodcraft and finding water in Mordor. That's an impressive skill. People who can find water in the wilderness. I infer this must have once been a fairly normal skill into the 19th century. You read about the explorations of Fremont and guys like that, finding water sources, but I don't know many people contemporarily who can do it. I have found water in the wilds, but I don't feel like I'm not Strider about it. But I was impressed at Sam having that power. Frodo uses a word in an archaic way. He says to Sam, quote, lie down and take your proper turn, off quote. Of course, that's not proper as in like pinky out and drinking your tea and which fork to put on which side, but rather your own turn, like in the sense of Spanish propio, right? I was struck to see the word Uruk in association with orc. Apparently, Uruk is kind of a different kind of orc. Made me think about Slavic languages that have different that do vowel R sequences differently. Novgorod versus Belgrade, or Gorod and Grad come from the same root word. They just have done different things. Metathesis with the vowel and the R. So I wondered if, what is orc supposed to be as a word here? I think Tolkien, as I recall, took it from the Orkneys that we read about in Beowulf, but I don't know if it's supposed to be a borrowing from Black Speech or Sindarin or whatever in the Lord of the Rings world. Frodo's strength begins to give out. So they're forced into marching for miles and miles with some orc troops. Frodo's strength begins to give out as the slope begins to actually finally go down. So it seems ironic, but of course, as Eric Hoffer has often observed, things we actually react to hard circumstances often once they get easier, right? It's the prospect of relief that makes us finally either give out or, stand against oppression is his main example, but I thought that was notable. Meanwhile, as chapter 3 starts, Sam, hope dies in him. I feel like this happened before, but again, I thought about that quote from the Battle of Malden because hope dies in him, but he gets more resolved. So, he shall the Herta the Cainra, Mode shot the Marath, the Ura May and Litlath. The mind should be the harder, the heart the keener, the courage the greater, as our strength lessens. Sam also says, quote, trust to luck again. It nearly failed us last time, but it didn't quite, off quote. So luck is a thing. You can be lucky or unlucky as a true characteristic, like in the sagas. You can be giftutrjugur. You can have propensity toward luck. Again, like in the sagas or like in Breaking Bad, right? You don't understand, Jesse says to Hank. Walter White is smarter than you and he's luckier than you. And apparently that means something to the hobbits too. As Sam and Frodo approach Mount Doom, the Nazgul are abroad, quote, on other errand, off quote. I wondered if Tolkien is able to use errand as a plural. I believe the plural of errand in Old English would be errand. It strikes me as a random word to use the Old English plural of. Maybe there's dialects in British English that use errand as singular and plural. Don't know. Yeah, here, this is where it says that the shoulders of the mountain are 3,000 feet above the plain, quote, and above them was reared half as high again its tall central cone, off quote. So I infer that's 4,500 feet. It's not very much. I wondered at Sauron's road and how it's often repaired, that the road to the Chambers of Fire in Mount Doom, why is it often repaired? What does he do up there? I don't think that was ever really explained. Because if he's making stuff for the orcs, then why do the orcs who have the red eye symbol on them have worse stuff than the ones who come from Minas Morgul? Because we were told they did when Sam and Frodo were looking through their stuff, deciding what to borrow. Gollum has, quote, old griping strength, off quote, Griping. Of course, Old Norse gripa is to grip. So I wondered if this is a borrowing from the Norse word that may be used in some English dialects. At any rate, could also be specifically used of wrestling. I wonder if there are English dialects where it's specifically used of wrestling. That may be what that's, like gripping in that sense. And then I don't really get how, as Sauron begins to wonder about what's happening to the ring, his captain's quote, suddenly steerless, bereft of will, wavered and despaired, for they were forgotten. The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain, off quote. So are they drones? I don't know. Interesting chapters nonetheless. Here's another cultural remark that I wanted to make. I often reflect on the archaic vocabulary here, and as I've said, it's not that I don't know a lot of archaic vocabulary, it's that I guess I'm just alien to the desire to use it this way. I come from here, right? Here. What's the nicest background right now? I'll switch to the mountain for a minute. I don't know. Like, I would never use... I have probably a weird sounding vocabulary to people anyway, just because I'm a bookworm, but I would never deliberately try to use particularly archaic vocabulary. I would never try to stand out with my vocabulary, right? And just running around in normal day-to-day life. I feel like it's just a good way to either have people despise you or, in high school, a good way to just get socked in the face or something. It's, so I guess there's a part of me that's constantly surprised, like, wow, this guy just goes for it, right? He just says this stuff. like, yeah, it's my profession to talk about old languages, but I do that on YouTube. I don't know. I'm not an artist, right? I'm not a producer, writer of literature as such. I think there's a fighter jet flying over me. Um, so it just, and I'm never going to write a novel. And if I did, I would write it in plainer language than this. It's just my own taste, and my own tastes are sort of conditioned by, like, you start using words that people don't understand, and they kind of hate you for it, right? Um, I just, it boggles my mind. Like, if I presented this to, like, my grandparents, they'd be like, "What the hell is this?" And my grandma had a master's degree in Old Akkadian and Ancient Egyptian. Like, was she was an intellectual of a that was kind of her calling. She never did it professionally, but it's just not what you. It's something. I don't know. I guess I just sort of culturally associate it with being something you sort of keep to yourself, and so it just surprises me the degree to which he again just goes for it. Just says, "You don't know this word. That's your problem. You have a dictionary," right? And a very different attitude informs my way of talking about just about everything, even intellectual subjects, and my way of translating. Um, I infer that this is a cultural difference too, but one worth noting um, as we continue to go through this book that I'm beginning to reflect is from a quite different time, and in many ways, probably a quite different place. All right, well, for now, from beautiful, very cold Ashore, Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.